Welcome back to Lap of the World and to Daytona International Speedway. This video is mainly intended to show some reference laps for help learning the track before you might go and drive it yourself. However, in a break from tradition, this time I'm going to include some narrative covering both a lap of Daytona as well as a little car comparison with the apt dance partner we found in our group on this occasion. First things first, title implications aside, there is no quote-unquote racing in this video. This was simply two drivers in cars of similar pace having some fun in an HPDE group. Any passing was done via acknowledged point buy, and this group allowed passing anywhere. With that said, I think this is a fun comparison, so let's look at these cars separated by 20 years in production, but probably only a second or so in lap time. In the black and gold livery, we have the all too familiar on this channel 1992 NA1 Acura NSX. There are 303,000 miles on the odometer of this example, last I checked around 267 horsepower at the wheels, weighing a little under 3,000 pounds with me in it, riding on KW suspension and shod with Falcon Azenis RT 660s in sizes 215mm front and 255mm rear. In the white and black livery, we have a 2012 Porsche Cayman R. Mileage unknown, in theory 330 horsepower at the crank, quoted curb rate of 3,000 pounds, shod with what I observed were presumably 235mm front and 265mm rear Toyo R888 or R888R, I couldn't quite tell. If you are the driver of this Cayman R, I enjoyed chasing you around Daytona, and I hope you'll feel free to chime in with any details or modifications that I missed. We first meet our quarry in false grid before what would be our fourth session of the weekend as he gridded up one slot behind me. Again, this is not a race, there was no qualifying, so grid spots are more or less first come first serve, or by choice if you want to be towards the back. With respect to early Caymans, my experience suggests that my NSX and I should be able to gap a stock non-S 987, and we should expect to need to put in a little bit of work to stay in touch with a well-driven 987.1S. I actually hadn't been on track near enough to a Cayman R before, but on paper I'd have expected it to slowly drive off on us, all other things being equal. We will see how that pans out in a moment, but for now, as we are navigating out of the false grid and through a little bit of the paddock area to make our way back out onto the pit road, let's talk a little bit of navigation at Daytona. Once you get out of the false grid, you're going to kind of wind around, and they've got it pretty well marked, and at least on this occasion they had people directing traffic so you don't get lost, at least on your first session. Then you're going to enter onto the pit road. In our case, we're following a lovely silver 996 GT2 up here who will promptly bugger off in the first straight section of track. But once you get onto the pit lane, you will want to move over to this left-hand lane that's delineated from the rest of the pit lane and the what would be, I guess, your pit boxes. This is the traveling lane, and once you're out here, you want to stick around somewhere 35 miles an hour or so. That's what we were told. And that's where I was trying to stick from an indicated standpoint. GPS bounces around as it will. Once you get up here to the exit, it is worth noting that the exit is very tight. If you've ever watched the Rolex 24, you will have seen probably over the years numerous drivers get victimized going through here too enthusiastically on cold tires or in the rain and finding the pit wall that is now to our right. There's no reason to be too enthusiastic there. We're in an HPDE group. There is no time undercut that I'm worried about to the for the next pit stop or anything like that. So now getting out here on the track, we're going to take my out laps are probably a little more chill than some. I want to make sure that everything is up to temperature and everything is as it should be. This outlap will actually be a little bit spicier than my usual outlap for an HPDE session, but it's because it's the second, third, whatever it is. It's several sessions into the day at this point. Everything's up to temperature, and the track conditions are pretty much ideal, so not too much to pay attention to, although I am going to be a little conservative through the banking, again, for this first lap, to make sure that I have my tires up to pressure before I carry any real speed through there. That is kind of one thing you do want to pay attention to at Daytona. If you're running too low a tire pressure, the extra compression that you get going through the banked turn can actually cause some sidewall issues that can end up being a bad day if they get too bad and you end up with a blowout with a wall there to your right. So coming through here again, you'll see his peak speed's just under 120 there. Normally we'll be well north of that by this point. And then we're going to kind of cruise down here to the bus stop chicane on our first lap. and be a little bit conservative through here as well. Still using all the track and using all the rumble strips, but just not quite leaning the car into them quite as much. And then back out again onto the banking. As you can see, we've now the GT2 up there is now in the next zip code, and we're about to point by our friend here, who I actually don't know the gentleman. If you own this car or were driving it, it was a lot of fun to have somebody that was kind of similar-ish pace to play around with in a group of otherwise ridiculously fast cars. But having pointed by our Cayman R Rabbit up here, we get to see if we can keep in touch. So we are going to come around here and see. We'll start to kind of pay attention to where there are differences, and this is another fun thing to do in an HPDE group that is kind of, you know, especially once you get to the advanced level where you don't have an instructor sitting in the right seat with you, but you see somebody who's in a similar car but maybe is faster in certain sections and not as fast in other sections. Well, you kind of follow them and you pay attention to see how their line is different from yours. You know, especially in this context where you both have mid-engine cars with, you know, not the same but kind of similar class of horsepower and similarly sticky tires. I think I would probably wager that the ultimate grip of a Toyo R888R is probably not too much more than the ultimate grip of a Falcon RT660. But here we are. We've seen a little bit of difference already. He's had a little bit of a wiggle through this horseshoe. I've used a little bit more track on the exit, and I think the same was true in the first horseshoe. He gets better about that later, and I don't catch him as much there. I think we also carried a little more speed through the dog leg, the little kink in the infield. But now is when I had to kind of maximize my exit because I know he's got 50 more horsepower than me and is just going to run off on the straight, and that is exactly what happens here. We are definitely up to speed, though. You'll see us hit somewhere around 120 once the GPS corrects in the banked turn, and then we should peak, I believe, closer to 140 before we brake for the bus stop, now that we're up to speed. So I think the GPS has got a little bit of a delay working on fixing that. But then we're going to carry speed, you know, a little more of speed here through the bus stop because it feels like he's not as far ahead afterwards. There's always a little bit of a concertina there when you're going through a slower section. The following distance, even if the time gap stays the same, will shrink. Now here we are going to catch him, but it's just because the driver of the 944 there didn't quite get his arm out the window early enough to let him pass without lifting, but then he gets us both by. I will say it is kind of awkward at times with the bank turns in particular. If you don't have your mirrors aimed right, it is hard to see somebody coming up on you with any, especially if there's, you're considering the closing speeds that we were seeing in this group. All right, so coming back into the infield section, let's see if we can stay with him now that we've caught back up on account of traffic. So through here again, once we get under full throttle, you can definitely tell there's a horsepower difference. However, I think with some enthusiastic application of the brakes, I've managed to keep things in check there. Although I think he got probably a better run out of that turn this time than I did. But let's see how we do through the dogleg this time. Coming in here, getting a nice late apex with just a lift. You don't want to brake there. To quote my friends over at Drivers Therapy, only noobs brake there. But I definitely think I caught him through there again a little bit. And then here, I kind of kept it tighter longer, but I'm not sure that I needed to. I think I probably should have taken a later apex there, and I could have gotten on the gas a little earlier to maximize the short shoot. And then here again, I got to turn in early and then get back on the gas. And that sounded like a short shift. It sounded like a 7,000 RPM shift instead of an 8,000 RPM shift. That's the only place on the track I was really kind of short shifting. And it's just because the transition up onto the banking, it felt a little awkward, and I didn't want to accidentally hit the rev limiter and upset the car. I've seen a much more famous and skilled driver than myself put a Lamborghini in the wall there, and I don't want to follow suit. But here we are lifting a little bit to accommodate getting the fellow in the 996 past before we have to turn into the bus stop, just so things don't get awkward. And then again, trying to maximize our exit on the bus stop. That should be, you know, if you're not racing and worried about somebody out braking you into the bus stop, and you're just looking at a lap time or taking a smooth line through there, then you definitely want to err on maximizing your exit versus trying to carry so much speed in. And here again, we're coming back around, and about this time I was realizing that my tank was about on empty, and I wasn't sure how much I was going to be able to carry forth. And while I'm looking at my gas gauge, I was probably a little bit late on the point buy to get this Ferrari challenge car around, but you know, again, he doesn't need any help in a braking zone to get it done, and he can carry on about his way, having not been held up too much. And we're back around here, and I have slowed up significantly, but that's okay. We'll move on to the next session. This time I decided to flip the script and just grid up behind the Cayman R, and figure since, yeah, he was probably driving off of me a little bit. And on this occasion, though, I was able to leverage having kind of a rabbit out there in the distance to turn what was kind of my hero lap for the weekend. I wasn't doing too much differently. You will note that I ride out 4th gear going into the bus stop rather than upshifting to 5th. I'll let you guys just watch this one, as it is the fastest lap of the weekend. So with a friendly tow from our Cayman R up here, we're going to cross the line at about 150 miles an hour, which is a personal best for this NSX. Then we're going to point by a GT3 Cup car under the understanding that it's just going to blow by us in the braking zone and we don't need to lift, on our way to a 2-minute 14-second lap, which is definitely a little bit of an outlier from this weekend. But again, I think a friendly tow, maximizing 4th gear a couple of places, and then trying to be as tidy as possible and get on the gas as early as possible in the infield kind of helped us to get that lap time, which is kind of in our usual wheelhouse of respectable but nothing to write home about. And that will do it for this session. We're going to move on then to our last session of the weekend, which will be the last time that we see our our Cayman R buddy. This was the morning of the last day, and my fun really started, though, pointing by a Tesla driven by, I believe, a professional racing driver on my out lap, and then in the best Top Gear spirit, decided I needed to hold it down for the internal combustion crowd and then set off in pursuit once things were warmed up. You can see him kind of off there in the distance, having put a little bit more of a gap on me between when I was warming up and when I started trying. I'm not sure it would have mattered with the driver in question, but one could hope. And then we are coming up on our friend in the Cayman on his out lap, hence the difference in speed. I'm on my first flying lap. He's just come out of the pits, so just lets me go by into the bus stop. I thank him for that, and then continue my pursuit of the evil EV overlord up here. Let's talk, we can kind of talk through a lap here. Coming into the braking zone, it's a little tricky coming off the banking, but you brake in stages, and then you'll clip on that piece of grass there. Your apex is kind of halfway through and about as close as you're going to get to that pit wall. You'll track out to mid-track to get yourself flat through this section in good order. You don't want to go all the way out after turn 1. Coming into the first horseshoe, international horseshoe, you want to be kind of mid-track, and then you want to get it tight. But then you want to get a late apex and get on the gas early. And there's more track, more pavement that you can use out here than you think. There's a little bit of an access road that you can kind of cheat over onto if you want to. Coming into the dog leg, this again is a late apex. You get through there with a lift, I think, in most cars. Coming through the west horseshoe, it again is a very late apex. Takes a lot of patience to get that turn right. And then into turn 6, you again here want to just maximize how early you can get back to full throttle, because this is leading on to one of the fastest sections of the racetrack. You're effectively on a straight at this point, even though it is definitely a turn on the map. But you can even see through the window there how little steering input I'm having to do to get around the curve, even going nearly 130 miles an hour by the time we exit. Coming up here to the bus stop, you'll kind of figure out where your braking zone is, and then I'm told that there's a photographer slot in the window, or in the fence over there, that's roughly around where you want to turn in. Now, I missed the entry apex that time, but I get the exit done pretty well here. And then again, here you're going to want to kind of stick low on the banking to minimize the distance that you're traveling, unless you're in something fast enough to warrant staying up a groove effectively. You will want to stay away, maybe a car width or so away from the yellow line down there, as that is the transition from the banking onto the apron, and it can be severe enough to upset a car if you touch it with a wheel. And then you're hitting your peak speed through here. This is all flat until you get across the start-finish line, and then depending on your cars, we're going to pick your braking zone, coming across here. Again, kind of clipping on the grass there, and then continuing out here to the outside before turning in again. You do want to be close on that inside, close to the pit wall on that inside on turn 1, to give yourself the best exit through the S's. And then you always kind of want to, I always tend to, look over at the pit lane there as I'm coming past, just to make sure nobody's coming out, because the proper school line, you're kind of cheating across the blend line a little bit on the way into the international horseshoe. But here again, we're going through the dog leg, and I think by this point in time you've gotten the idea. So I'm just going to shut up a little bit and let you enjoy the last few laps of my trip to Daytona. Again, I was kind of running short on gas here, so I think my gas tank lasted only slightly longer than the Tesla's battery that I'm now catching up here. But it was overall a great weekend. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment down below if you prefer this narrative style more than what I've done previously with quote-unquote just the laps. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, we can confirm that sticking to the video title here, that a Cayman R is slightly faster than a first generation NSX. as we start what will be our cool down lap here, I will remind you that if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to drop a like down below. Leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions. And if you do want to see more of this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell, so that way you will get a notification next time we get out to another racetrack. At this point, it looks like that's going to be probably in 2022, which will... You know what? I'm not even going to make any predictions. Last time I said something about having a good year. It ended up being 2020, and nobody wants that again. So with one last point by of our Cayman R friend who had eventually caught us again, we're going to call this a video. I do thank you again for watching, and until next time, I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World. I'll see you in the next video, if not at the track.